compliance and navigating challenges and opportunities, organized by the alumni team at the Academy. I'm very happy to have all of you here today for the first panel discussion of 2020, which will be also the first one of an upcoming series focusing on women in compliance and in an anti-corruption world. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and made available next week on IACA's webpage. We also welcome you to raise questions during the entire session using the question and answer window down below. Before I start, I would like to quickly introduce our Dean, the Executive Secretary of IACA, but I don't see him here at the moment yet, so I will do the quick introduction to our Academy. As an introduction, IACA is both an international organization and educational institution, which aims to deliver anti-corruption education and trainings to professionals and practitioners from all over the world. Our headquarters is in Luxembourg, Austria. At the same time, we're also working on partnerships with state and non-state actors to develop anti-corruption initiatives, provide technical assistance, and serve as a platform for exchange and dialogue. I can see our Dean and Executive Secretary of IACA now, Thomas Stelzer. Thank you for joining us today. Maybe you can raise a few points about our alumni network, as I already introduced IACA now. The floor is yours. You are still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Marie. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this web event organized by our alumni network on women in compliance. You know, women in compliance, women in anti-corruption is a very important issue for us, but because very often women are the weakest link in the chain in corruption. It's the women who have to pay for access to medical service in many countries, to water, to education. So women and corruption is a very important issue. Happy to address many of our alumni today. You know, we have many alumni. You know, we have about 3,000 alumni in more than 170 countries who have benefited from IACA's products and programs, from the academic programs, from the technical assistance programs, from our webinars, for multiple products. All of our alumni are very important to us because they're bridgeheads, they're multipliers. They have learned how to better implement the UN Convention Against Corruption through our technical assistance and capacity building efforts, which are directed mainly at practitioners, people who work in the field, in one way or the other, supporting the fight against corruption. We very much believe in our alumni network. That's why we are constantly strengthening it, providing support, guidance for their networks. As many of our alumni are very active in their countries. They have created their own networks, which they inspire and lead, and into which they introduce what they have learned at IACA. And I think that's the most important thing, this multiplying effect. We're a very small organization with a huge task. You know, corruption, the fight against corruption recently moved to the center of the global agenda as a cross-cutting issue of the Sustainable Development Goals, a precondition for the implementation of the goals. The fight against corruption is getting increasing importance and attention. And there are not many, so that's a huge and interesting policy field to fight corruption with very few players. We're the only organization, and I think Marie, you've already referred to that, who is dedicated to the comprehensive fight against corruption. At the same time, we're the only international organization which is at the same time an institution of higher learning in the Bologna system, authorized to award academic degrees, postgraduate degrees to practitioners who have worked in their profession a number of years already and who have come to the understanding that they want to scale up their own capacities to work better and to implement UNCAC better. This is what we are doing, and this is what we are continuing to do, increasingly so, because as a global organization, we're always looking how to increase the value we can add to global efforts in the fight against corruption. I thank all of you for your interest, for participating in this event. I wish you well, and I hope to meet you when this COVID crisis is over and we can meet again face to face. Thank you, Marie, and good luck for your event this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. I would also like to raise quickly attention to two of our diplomas, which are still open for application. The first one is the postgraduate diploma in anti-corruption enforcement, with the focus on studying the nexus between corruption and other forms of crime, providing you with various tools and techniques in investigation and enforcement. Another diploma that we have is in collaboration with the United Nations Research and Training Institute called UNITAR, and it's called Executive Diploma in Anti-Corruption and Diplomacy. The main focus, as the name already mentions, is anti-corruption and diplomacy. Both diplomas are part-time programs and held online or in a hybrid mode, and luckily open for application. Coming to the subject of today's webinar, which I'm very much looking forward to, as it is a topic very close to my heart personally. IACA is committed to ensure a gender balance in the selection and recruitment of their staff at the Academy, and we're also very proud to have accomplished a balance of 60% women and 40% men, with great diversity in the countries they're coming from. However, our great challenge is also to achieve this gender balance for our academic programs. Our 2020 classes have a gender balance, for example, of a 34% women to 66% men, with students coming from 4 continents and 29 countries. With a panel discussions such like this one, and also the upcoming ones, we are trying to reach out to our female colleagues in the anti-corruption world and to encourage them to take on new opportunities, such as educational programs at IACA. And as a woman, this webinar and this panel discussion is important to keep an open dialogue. And I hope that everyone will stay in touch with us for the upcoming ones. Also worth mentioning is that we have for our online trainings at IACA still scholarships available for women from least developed countries who work in the business and compliance sector. Now, this is from my side, and I would like to introduce our moderator today, Sophia El-Mansouri. She is the founder of Compliantly LLC, a compliance and financial crime consultancy that offers a myriad of ethics and compliance solutions, from the design of compliance management system, training programs, and to the monitoring. Sophia is also known as the Compliance Lady, a prominent online writer on her blog online, thecompliancelady.com, where she keeps us updated with news and what is happening in the compliance and risk management world. Please, Sophia, it's your floor now.
Thank you so very much, Mary and Thomas, for your kind introduction, and hello to everybody. Firstly, we'd like to thank the IACA for the invitation today and for the organization of this event. It is my immense pleasure and honor to host this panel devoted to compliance ladies and the challenges faced by our profession, so we may hopefully better support each other. This panel is mainly dedicated to the ladies in compliance, but I understand that we have a large audience today from all over the world, maybe some male peers joining us, so we will try to keep the discussion inclusive. I hope, so first of all, some housekeeping items before we start the discussion. I hope that you all can see the chat section and the question section at the bottom of the screen. We strongly encourage all of you to not hesitate to react in the chat and share your comments with us or direct your questions to our panelists. Mary and the editorial team will select the questions throughout the webinar, and we will give our panelists the opportunity to answer the questions during the Q&A session. Also, in parentheses, the IACA often hosts webinars focusing on anti-corruption, governance, risk, compliance issues. So if you have any suggestions for a webinar that could help you in your respective industry or country, please let us know and share in the comment section. So for today's agenda, it will be a 1 hour, 15 to 1 hour and a half webinar, depending on the questions. And the discussion will focus on the challenges and opportunities of being a woman in compliance, but also what we may do to encourage and enable women to enter into C-level positions and obviously more senior compliance positions. Voila. So I suggest that we first present today's panel, and we will take a few minutes to do so. I hope that you can see all of our speakers at the bottom of our screen. So our first speaker is Loidette Bay-Marrow, who's the CEO and founding partner at Parametric Global Consulting. Loidette is an anti-corruption expert and economic crime lawyer. She's a white-collar crime investigation. She has a white-collar crime investigation practice that provides practical advice, strategic guidance, and effective capacity building to corporates and institutions. She's a former principal investigative lawyer within the UK's government serious fraud office, where she provided legal advice and leadership on top-tier cases of fraud, bribery, and corruption in the UK and abroad. She has worked in UK government departments, including the Crown Prosecution Service and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So we're very fortunate to have Loidette with us today. She was appointed as well as an independent investigation counsel for a US publicly traded company in 2020, and she undertook a review on their behalf into corruption and other allegations. Last but not least, she's also a visiting lecturer at the International Anti-Corruption Academy in Vienna, Austria. Our second speaker, Archana Shastri, is a regional compliance officer, APAC region. So you're going to excuse me on this one. This is a German name, and I'm really bad in German. Tyson Kropp, I hope I'm saying it correctly, based in Singapore. Archana is a corporate lawyer who embarked on her compliance career in 2009, and she moved to Singapore from India. She has led the compliance function at Asia Pacific across industries, including marine, IT, steel, and industrial engineering, with reputed organizations headquartered in the United States and Europe. In her regional roles, Archana has been part of management committees, including setting up and chairing regional compliance committees and networks, with an aim to raise awareness among and provide guidance to regional leadership for demonstration of the effective tone from the top. For more than a decade now, Archana has worked closely with global stakeholders on crafting global compliance policies and processes, providing compliance trainings, as well as providing compliance advisory and conducting compliance audits. In the last few years, she has also managed internal investigations, both independently and with external support of legal and forensic service providers, with a view to reporting to regulatory authorities such as the US SEC and the DOJ. And last but not least, we have Mayra Colino, who's a senior compliance analyst at Siemens Energy. Mayra is based in Brazil. She's a compliance professional since 2016, a mother, and passionate for human rights, integrity initiatives, and education. She's responsible for compliance training and communication program, ambassadors programs, compliance risk assessments, gifts and hospitalities, collective action, and others. She's a candidate for the International Master in Anti-Corruption, Compliance, and Collective Action at the IACA. She's also a certified unethics professional, international, by the SCCE. And she's also an executive program of GRC by KPMG Business School. Her international experience includes living in the US and China, which is quite unusual, I might say. Voila. So this was an introduction of our panel today, and we may now open the discussion. So my first question for the day will be addressed to Archana. Archana, in your experience, how does the APAC region view women in compliance? Have you personally faced unique challenges being a woman, but not only a woman, also a woman of ethnicity, aka a woman of color?
Thanks, Sophia, and thank you for everybody who joined in. Let me start by saying that to me personally, color is not a binary concept, right? My personal experiences from my early days as a compliance professional are influenced in a small degree, given the fact that I'm a South Asian woman raised in an environment where hierarchy equaled respect and where women worked for financial independence, not to build a career and have to choose between being a professional or being a good mother. So that's kind of my background. Let me also add that the concept of challenging the status quo or rocking the boat was probably viewed as being the nature of an unnecessarily rebellious middle child, probably. I only became aware that I was a woman of color, or I would be considered a woman of color, when I moved out of India. Prior to that, I must admit, I led a very protected and comparatively privileged life as an upper middle class Indian, considered from a fairly good, strata in caste pedigree. Of course, topics for another webinar or another day. I recollect in my early days when I used to make presentations or conduct trainings, I used to suffer mildly from the imposter syndrome. I often found myself standing there, visibly and audibly a South Asian lady, typically training and talking to a room full of people on topics of compliance, bribery, corruption, to a room full of Singaporeans, Australians, Japanese, obviously not necessarily seeing themselves in the same kind of arena as where I had come from. So those were some of my, my very early day challenges that I faced. It wasn't made easy by some of the offhand remarks, somebody who thought they were being informal or funny, where they'd say things like, well, you know how it works or, we come from a country where corruption is not part of our culture, like, where. And those are the things that really stayed with me. I also remember I would almost feel embarrassed when I had to give examples of what facilitation payments may look like or what petty corruption looks like. Because oftentimes I knew that I was actually tapping into experiences that I had either seen or found myself in a different lifetime. So that definitely was something that I had to deal with. The other challenge that I faced in my career as a woman of color per se was the opportunities outside the region. So I must say I was very fortunate in my early days to have worked with chiefs of compliance and managers who saw beyond color, gender, and in fact, for me, even age parameters in offering me opportunities to do some great work. But unfortunately, anything beyond the region has remained a little elusive to me in terms of opportunities. I recollect vividly a conversation, a very candid conversation I had years back with somebody who said, Archana, you would be great for this job in this place and in this country. But unfortunately, as an Indian woman, I think this just might not work out the way we want it to. And I remember we came out of that conversation saying it was such a shame that that is the conversation that we had and that's how it had to be at the point. But coming out of it hopeful that someday this would not be a conversation we'd be having, that someday I would be in a position to make that decision for myself and decide whether I wanted to make myself available, my experience and my expertise to another region of the company, right? So those were some of my experiences. Now, we have come some ways in Asia Pacific where I must say I have seen women of color, and remember, we are talking not of the binary definition of women of color. I have seen that. I've seen them in compliance leadership roles, but still not enough. I also think that women of color from Asian countries, at least, will do phenomenally well in the region when they are entrusted with opportunities to grow and make meaningful contributions outside the region. So to this, I would probably look to women like the Leena Nayars or the Dr. Lisa Sues of the world, hoping that they will pave the way for women, especially women from Asia, not only to be able to embark upon these kind of roles outside of Asia Pacific, but also on our own home turf here in Asia.
Thank you so much, Archana. That's actually quite insightful, and I'm sure quite a bit of women in the audience can relate. You let us know in the comments if this has also been your experience, whether in the APAC region or elsewhere, in terms of ethnicity. Have you faced such discrimination, we shall say, yourself? Let us know in the comments. My next question is addressed to Loydette. And Loydette, we've heard a lot about the challenges associated with women in law enforcement, particularly lately in the UK, you know, the whole noise with the SFO or whatnot. We will not get too much into that, but with your background working at the SFO, what challenges have you personally faced?
Thank you so much. So before I start on my reflections, I'd like to say a sincere thank you to Ayaka and to the Dean and to Marie for the very kind invitation to be part of this phenomenal group of women that are present both on the panel but also virtually. It's really a pleasure, and I think it's important these conversations are had and these discussions and these topics are aired. And so Archana, you know, you're a hard act to follow, and I empathize with so much of what you have said. I think I'll start with my SFO experience. Now, the Serious Fraud Office in the UK was really my dream job. It was the place that I wanted to work since I qualified as a lawyer. I trained there, went off and did some other work in government before coming back. And when I joined the SFO, I think around 2 weeks after I joined, it suddenly dawned on me that there were no other Black lawyers. And it was a really strange feeling because there were lots of Black women and lots of Black men working within the organization, but most of those were in administrative and junior roles. And as I was sat in meetings and I went to working groups and got involved in the organization as a whole, other than just being a case lawyer, I thought, there's no one else like me here. And that was the reality for an organization of some 350 people. Not only were there no other Black lawyers, but there were no Black women, no Black female lawyers. And did that make me feel a particular way in whether that be negative or not? No, I just thought, well, this has to change and we have to find a way to navigate this. I've always been very comfortable in my own skin. I am a visibly Black woman and I've lived in the UK for the majority of my life. I'm of African descent. And I think one of the things about my experiences of working in law enforcement, whether you're a Black woman or you're just, you're a woman of color or you're not a woman of color, is about understanding your own value and your own worth and recognizing that when you are in a space, it's because you are qualified to be there. Not because anybody has done you a favor, but you qualified to be there. And so therefore, I've led teams at the SFO and in previous roles where I have been, in essence, the boss. I've had to make decisions about what is going to happen to a particular case. And I also at the SFO worked in a multidisciplinary team. So that meant that my counterparts, I had a case controller who was the boss of the team, and then myself as principal investigative lawyer and a principal investigator, and then all these different people who filtered underneath us. And sometimes as a woman who you might be the only woman in the team, and you have to be able to make your voice heard. And you have to be confident enough to be able to stick with what it is that you've said and not bend. And that's not necessarily mean that you are unable to work as a team or be collegiate, but it's actually about saying that what I have to say matters and it's important. And so therefore I'm going to say it and I would like you all to listen. It's difficult when you're a woman, especially at the senior level, working in a male-dominated environment. Law enforcement is more male-dominated than it is female. That's just the reality. And as you funnel up into senior leadership, that is dramatically the case in most circumstances. So I'm just reflecting on that and saying to the audience today that from my perspective, by the time I left the SFO, there were several Black lawyers working there. There were several Black trainees and others who were coming up into the organization. And that was a positive thing for me. If I reflect back on my previous roles working as a prosecutor for the state prosecutor, I would always be in interactions with police officers. And police officers don't like to be told what to do, generally. And so when you would, as the lawyer who's making a decision around whether or not a matter should be prosecuted, I would often face quite a lot of resistance to my decisions. But again, one of the things that I was very sure about, and I am, I'm grateful for the way that I was brought up, I am very, very, very confident. And so I would very much say to someone, if you don't like the decision that I've made, it's okay, but it's there, I've made it, and that's the way we're going to go. And I can justify why I have made the decision that I have made. And so for me, it's been a mixed bag in terms of working as a woman in law enforcement. I've had incredible support from my colleagues, male and female. I've had incredible resistance at times from those who don't think I have a right to be there, or I have a right to be in a position as senior as that, or I have a right to be in a position that is more senior than them. But regardless of all of it, I think one of the things I would like to end with is the lack of, I would say this, it's important for us to be visible. It's important for women to be visible in the workforce, whether that's in private sector or in the public sector. And I think that visibility must then also be aligned with a degree of confidence in your right to be there and to own that space.
Well, Loidette, bravo. Honestly, I'm inspired. That's very, thank you for your candor, first of all, and thank you for these inspirational words. We can certainly look up to, women who have had such experience and such background, and hopefully find our own voice, and inspiration from what you have just shared. So thank you for that, Loidette. My next panelist, Myra, is a working mother. So Myra, as a working mother of 2 young children, can you tell us a little bit, obviously everybody knows that being a working mother, juggling home and work responsibilities can be seen as a challenge, especially with a role as demanding as compliance. So in your opinions, how may companies, how may support groups, network groups, better support working mothers in our industry and help them achieve a better work-life balance?
Thank you, Sophia. I also got very inspired by my colleagues here, and it's I related totally with what they just said. First, I also would like to say thank you to Marie and Yaka for inviting me this. It's a pleasure for me. And also to do a brief disclaimer that I'm expressing here my opinions, my thoughts and idea by experience, by my own experience and benchmarking, right? And not necessarily by my company or anything. Regarding this challenge, even before a pandemic, we know that was already a real challenge for us. And now with the pandemic, we just needed extra time. We needed to a better organization, right? To put it, because the whole dynamic changed drastically, right? And that brings us challenge, but also opportunities as we're talking here for companies. How can we now really address, right, this topic and make things easier together, thinking together? So first, what I would say that helped me to have an open and safe environment, right? We are talking here culture, and employees need to feel safe in order to talk and speak up. And just like we as a compliance professional, we want that, is what we also work for, right? But in order to build that, companies need to work on their organization culture. Before pandemic, so companies or management did not even like home office, was already something that we work on. So now they have to accept, right? Very important topic for that, it's something more related to legal, is the extension of your paid parental leave. But I have to mention that that's a really important topic, that we need that time, and having our partner with us, it's crucial as well. So not only for the mother, but for the father, or your partner itself. So if possible, go beyond what law says to do it. 40 years ago, here in Brazil, maternity leave was only 20 days. And my mother had only 1 week of maternity leave because the company wanted her and had some, some work to her. So she could not even complete the 20 days. Nowadays, we know that would just not be acceptable, but it's something that we still need to work on. And I would say beyond law, if possible. Seek for best practice, maybe even inside the company. Know and understand your company's reality. It's crucial to implement anything. So what is the real problem? Is it an overload work that's happening? Or it's just maybe flexible schedule that we need to organize? Maybe it's not even company's problem exactly. Maybe it's like I said, the whole new dynamic that's changing, but we could work that out together, talking to know the problem and how to work that. Sometimes creating simple ideas, mentorship, leadership programs. We've seen that, we know that this works, and that's a really good practice. And to exchange ideas, sharing knowledge groups, even having parent-employee work groups that they could talk to each other, by they are having kind of same reality. Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone facing the same problem as you than with your family or someone from your country if it's not exactly facing the same problem. So when you related, right? It's about relating to, so it's important. And also a good onboarding, I'd say, as we know it's important, but also a plan, this working order to live in peace and to come back to work in peace as well, having that in mind that they are facing a new situation. They will need this extra effort. Yeah, they are also getting used to this new life, for everybody. So I think it's also some practical things that easy, you don't need to a great effort or to expend a lot of money on. So that could work, could be a start, but having working on organization culture, working as a speak-up culture is the start, so the mother can feel free to also discuss that in the company and not stay for themselves with this problem.
Thank you, Mayra. Those are all very great suggestions and recommendations. And I think we will touch a bit more on this aspect of company culture, because that's a great point, which we need to emphasize a bit more in the opportunities. And I'll come back to you on that one. But to go back now to Archana, we often hear that companies that are run by women CEOs are more likely to be more ethical and compliant. In your experience, could working for a woman CEO be seen as an opportunity? I mean, is there any truth to this myth, or is it just a myth? And then finally, my question also to you would be, should companies encourage more women in the C-suite?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies that are run by women CEOs can serve to inspire the women in its workforce to more confidently seek opportunities and to grow in leadership roles. So there is that role modeling within the organization itself with women CEOs. I say this as an employee of a company that is currently being led by a woman CEO who's made it to the top 10 list of, the world's most influential women internationally. If I were to look at the Fortune 500 companies, right, I believe 2021 has been a record year for women. The good news is that 41 Fortune 500 companies are being helmed by women. The more sobering news is that constitutes just 8.1% of Fortune 500 companies. So that's really the reality. Still, I think personally, and this is again my personal opinion, I think we need to hear a lot more about the great stuff that these women CEOs are doing, not just in terms of profitability or trying to turn around companies, but also in terms of further strengthening the values of corporate ethics in these organizations. There has to be a lot more chatter, a lot more buzz about how bringing a different flavor, a different style of leadership, even if it is a feminine, a female kind of centric style of leadership, we need to hear more about that and see how that influences and creates a positive impact on the overall corporate culture within companies. When men in leadership, especially in C-suite roles, are seen as strong or no nonsense or direct, sometimes even eccentric. In the past, at least, there was, it was attributed to being very admirable and sometimes even emulatable characteristics, right? And similarly, if you had women in leadership roles exhibiting some of those traits, well, how do I put it mildly? They were probably not very likable as leaders. So I think that's where we are coming from. Companies really have to and must encourage more women, including women of color at all levels of the organization, entry level, mid-level, and mid-management and management levels. That is really the way it has to be in order to create that culture. And equally importantly, they must be able to invest in and demonstrate that these women can actually grow, that they are allowed and can bring to the table their intrinsic style of leadership without having to conform to these archaic definitions of what we think is leadership. So that is something that is very, very important. Now, that needs to be systemic. That needs to be a conscious change in culture at every level of the organization. And I believe that if that does not happen, then this weight that we have to see more women in C-suite roles that are creating a meaningful impact will be a rather long wait. So I will probably kind of summarize by saying companies should absolutely encourage women, more women, women of different colors from different backgrounds and with different professional and different life experiences to create a different yet equally successful and inspirational impact on organizations.
That's very well said, Archana. Thank you so much. So, I mean, unfortunately, it's hard. I mean, in the absence of actual studies that compare, because I know that there's awards now every year on the most ethical companies in the world and whatnot, but we don't have such comparative studies that would say, okay, companies that are run by women are more likely to be more ethical rather than men. So that's an idea for survey organizers out there, or information gathering people, intelligence that we may have in the audience. And talking about the audience, have you yourself worked for a woman CEO, and what has been your experience? Would you say that the culture was more positive and more ethically driven, or not? It could be either or. Tell us in the comment section what has been your experience. Loidette, we come back to you. Now, from your experience, what would you say? Would you say that best practices exist from a crime prevention and enforcement perspective in finding your voice as a leader and seeing yourself as a compliance leader? Are there any areas perhaps where network groups or mentorship groups may better support women who may be shy or introverted? I know a lot of women face this imposter syndrome. Would you have some tips? Are you a strong woman yourself? I know you have a lot of tips, so please do share with us some of your knowledge.
I'm going to try. I think the first thing that I would say is around best practice. I wouldn't necessarily couch my best practice tips from a crime prevention perspective. I would say that we come to our jobs and we come to the roles that we hold. And following from what Archana said, with our life experiences, whether those life experiences are negative or they're positive, we do bring them into the workplace. And I think there's an importance about understanding and being aware of that. we also come with our vulnerabilities. We come with our isms and our schisms, the things that make us who we are. And I think self-awareness is a huge part of actually walking into the fullness of your role as a leader, especially in compliance. And so that awareness, that ability to be self-aware is extremely important, and to understand what makes you as an individual tick. Where are your buttons? How do people press them? And how do you react when individuals subject to provocation or aggression? How do you react? I'll share something with you, which is throughout my legal career, I spent a lot of time at the beginning of my career in court, like literally every day, prosecuting cases. Really hard work, really intense. I would go home and my brain would be hurting from the constant level of concentration that you have to have. But what I would also do every day on the train home is review how the day had gone. I would review it from the perspective of what did I do that was really good today? And what did I do that was not so great and I needed to improve? And I would come back the next day in the courtroom and try and fix those issues. So I think for us as women is that oftentimes we tend to slide towards being very negative in our review process. But actually it's important to think of it this way. What went really well and what could be better? Rather than this was terrible and it's all bad and I'm not a great lawyer, I'm not a great compliance leader. So self-awareness, the ability to review, but review from a positive perspective rather than from a negative perspective. I think also there is something around, I've already talked about finding your voice. Finding your voice isn't just about being confident or outgoing or being an extrovert. Not everybody's an extrovert. But I think it's about this deep-seated understanding of the role that you play within your organization. And again, to this value that you bring to your job. And I think also there's a question around, do we actually believe and see ourselves as leaders? Do we believe that? Or do we think we just have these titles and I'm just A? You're not just A, whatever it be, fill in the blanks. You perform a role which is vital and important. And without you there's something missing. So it's important that we see our roles as vital, but also that we see ourselves as leaders, even when potentially we're not in roles that are senior in the eyes of the world, and we prepare for leadership. I was telling the ladies when we were in our pre-call that when I go into a job, I often have like the next 5 years planned out. That's just me. But I'm very strategic about my role, and I'm very strategic about what I do when I'm in a job. And I start from day one thinking about what I need to do in order to progress, how I can make an impact, and how I can influence. I'll talk about those individuals who are shy or introverted. And I will align that with the importance of sponsors and champions. Talking about those who are introverted and shy, we're not all cast in the same model. So there will be people who are very comfortable in the public eye, who are very easy to talk to, who can talk to anybody. And there are others of us who are like, no, I just want to be in my little corner and just do my job. I don't want to talk to anybody, and it's okay. But I think you have to understand, you have to ask yourself, what do I want to achieve? What are my priorities? And then find a way of navigating your personality and your own, the way that you operate within those parameters. So networking, it doesn't have to be in a huge group of people and you're handing out business cards left, right, and center, and having these conversations that don't mean very much. It can mean finding somebody on LinkedIn or finding someone in your organization that you really respect, that you think, actually, this person's pretty cool and they're doing a good job. I want to have a conversation about how they got to where they were. So networking one-to-one is a very, very valuable thing. And I think also in this day and age of having the internet, and we're all virtual, we're all here virtually, Morocco, Brazil, London, Vienna, Singapore, you can talk to people virtually on a one-to-one basis and make genuine connections that will help you in your career. And then talking about the importance of sponsors and champions, I'll close with that bit. It's really important that as women, we understand and recognize the value of sponsors and champions. Too often we say, well, I need a mentor. I need a mentor to be a good leader. Where can I find someone to mentor me? That is an element of building leadership skills. But actually, we also need individuals who will say your name in the rooms that matter when you are not there. We need people who will champion us and who will sponsor us and say, actually, have you thought about Sophia? Have you thought about Mayura for this opportunity? They would be great. And people who are willing to give you a chance when others aren't. But that comes from relationship building, which is why I said the thing about networking and the sponsorship and championing people, they are part of two sides of the same coin. So those are my tips.
And those are all very good tips. And certainly I'm taking note myself. Yes, but I absolutely agree with you, Lloyd, that the importance of networking cannot be understated. It's very important, obviously, that we connect among women and that we support each other and we elevate each other mostly because, you know, together we are stronger, you know, so it's a quite important concept that I wish more women could obviously grasp all over the world. With that said, on another topic, we come back to the topic of culture, and we had touched on it a little bit earlier. And Mayura, we often talk about tone at the top, you know, but leadership does not limit itself to positions, you know, it starts with attitude, it starts with culture. Are there any areas where company cultures may perhaps encourage more diversity and more acceptance of women decision makers?
Yeah, I must say that sometimes we push ourselves too hard, right? A couple of years ago, one of my studies course that I was taking, I had to hear that I wasn't going to make it in compliance, that I should change my goal because I just wasn't analytic enough. You know, I was too human to, you know, the skills that wasn't right for this profession. And my professor back then told that for the only, I was the maybe 2 or 3 only women of 40 person in class. So I took that as a challenge for myself, you know, to show that I was capable of and that I was going to make it. But sometimes we face that. In companies, inside companies, the tone at the top is crucial, right? Because they are the ones, decision makers, they are the ones with money at the end. But we don't need to start or to wait for the decision. We need to realize our power and also the whole company environment that can take this flag, you know, and raise this flag and try to change that if they see this opportunity. As a compliance professional, we often use also, as we've said here already, my colleague said, middle and bottom, tone at middle and tone at the bottom. So they're really really important for this topic as well, to diversity. They are the ones who can spread this message as well for us. And they also are part of, can change that. They look to their colleagues. Sometimes they don't look at the top. They look at each other. So they are role models for them. And in order encourage more diversity, it's necessary also to work in inclusion, right? Giving everyone in the organization equal opportunity, having their voice equally heard. So you may hire equally women, but are you really promoting them? So working this culture inside the company is part of, sometimes this part in the company HR and even compliance. By essence, I say compliance because I see compliance, we have lots of women. I'm glad that it's a field that it has a lot of women taking leadership on that. And by essence, compliance has this flag of, you know, against harassment, against discrimination. Is part of, you cannot say you have a full compliance without, if your company have too many complaints on discrimination, too many complaints on harassment. something is not quite right. So we have this opportunity as compliance professional to be the leaders in this change, and work in that and spreading the message, and not only the top, but I would say that working the middle and the top is really crucial to that. And HR, of course, because they have the process, they are used to people as well, right? They know from trainings, they know for developments, they have these techniques that can help us to work that together. And many companies also do some committees, diversity committees, that can really help. And would recommend, of course, to have somebody specialist on that, right? So we don't want to see no like greenwashing, right? So having things nice on the paper, but you're not actually changing things. No, you're doing nice things, you're saying nice stuff, but not actually changing. But everybody can be a leader. Everybody should be a leader. Just need to find that voice inside you. That's important. That's where also we need support, this networking or companies support. Sometimes we need that to find ourselves, this voice in ourselves as well.
Absolutely, Mayra. Thank you so very much. Those are actually very poignant words to end up the conversation with. And again, it goes back to the importance of having a network and a support system, you know, among compliance women. And thankfully, there are some compliance networks out there, which, you know, we're more than happy, the panelists and myself, to address if you are interested, if you're a woman in compliance and would like to join such support groups. We're more than happy to support you with that. But to basically summarize today's conversation, and before we give the floor to the audience for their Q&A, I simply wanted to, first of all, thank you, ladies, for all your insightful and inspirational tips. Some noteworthy points, you know, that we will leave the audience with. Again, it's not enough to have a seat at the table. You also need to have a voice, okay, and that your voice should be listened to as a woman. Networking and support is essential, but it's not only ticking the boxes. Look for genuine connections, you know. COVID has facilitated for us Zoom calls and whatnot, you know, if we may suggest virtual coffees or virtual chats, you know, to connect with the support groups and connect with a fellow compliance women, you know, exchange tips and tricks and whatnot, you know, on how to be a better woman. There are also tools that we are more than happy to share with you if you are interested in such support groups. For women that are shy or introverted, the fear of being judged is real. This is very real. You know, for some, it's even paralyzing. And unfortunately, it's extremely important in our role. Certainly, you know, speaking to junior level people is not much of a problem, but if you're put in front of industry experts or peers or a C-suite full of males or leaders of the board even, or, you know, even to deliver training, you know, to your company, the fear kicks in. So I'm going to exchange my personal quick tip for the ladies, and I have exchanged it with you ladies before. Take the focus off of you and onto one key question only. You know, what are the key messages that your audience needs to hear, and, you know, what will be of most value to them? Focus on that one point. What insights, what information, what knowledge, what experience can you share personally to help them improve or make better decisions? Knowing that you can only share what you have and what you know, that's enough. You know, that should be enough, and that should hopefully take away some of that fear of addressing such panels and such audiences. And then finally, as Mary had mentioned earlier, women and diversity is not only important in the workplace, but also in educational settings, which is why our hosts today are actively encouraging women to take on challenges and opportunities. In fact, I think Mary has mentioned it in the chat section, but I'll say it again. The IACA is extending generous scholarships for IACA's online trainings for women, especially for women from least developed countries who work in business and compliance. So I would strongly encourage those of you who are interested to have a look at their website for more information, because their courses are really, really good. And I'm not saying this because I'm biased. I'm saying it because their courses are really, really good. So as we reach the end of our first part, we will now open the floor for our audience Q&A session. And we will give the audience a few more minutes to formulate the question to the panels if they have any. And then we will take the questions. Okay, so I'm starting the questions. I'm seeing the questions started coming in. Okay, so we have one question for Loïdette. Thanks, Loïdette, for sharing experiences in law enforcement. You have reflected on the inward perceptions from colleagues and counterparts. What of outward perception? Example, the people being prosecuted, did you perceive any negative or positive reactions from them?
Can you hear me, Sophia?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, the whole thing was frozen, but I have read the question, so I'll answer it, unless there was something else that you wanted to add to it. So it's a really interesting question by Andrew around outward perception. Sometimes people are surprised when I turn up, but to be honest with you, the reaction of most is, this is the person who's in authority or who's the decision maker. So especially for those who've been prosecuted. So this is the person that, you know, I have to deal with. Oftentimes I haven't really experienced negative reactions from those who are in that terms of those who are recipients of decisions that I make or anything like that. Most of the time, I think the challenge has always been internally. But I'll take the question by Andrew and broaden it a little bit more and say that outward perception is, I was a mentor for Tony Blair's foundation, which is the Tony Blair Foundation, and a specific program that they do on called the Compass Mentoring Scheme, and it was to do with girls from disadvantaged backgrounds. And they wanted basically women who had achieved quite a lot in their careers to really show these young ladies from, you know, inner London, city, you know, parts of London, that they really didn't have any exposure to Black or ethnic minority women who had achieved significant things in their careers so far. And I would say that the outward perception of our introductory meeting was that one of the girls said, I have never met or seen a Black lawyer ever. Never met one. And she lives in London. And I was just like, what? And it was, so those are the things that remind me about the importance of what I represent and the importance of what I do. And that when I step out in my role as a lawyer and investigator, now in private practice, that I step out with a spirit of excellence, because there are women and girls out there who don't even know that people like me exist. But that was, you know, it's the outward perception, not just by those who are impacted by what I do, but others as well.
Thanks, Loïdette. Those are also excellent pointers. Next question we have from Emilia, and I don't know who to address this question to, so you ladies tell me if it's relevant to any of you. Could the panelists speak about their experiences comparing and contrasting the private and public sector? Seems that the private sector is open to cultural change and diversity for genuine reasons of inclusion, whereas the public sector, the state, international, transnational organizations, etc., are stale, and there's more pushback or less interest in shifting the culture and structure. And thank you. And that's a really good question, actually, Emily. Any of you with this exposure to the public sector versus the private?
Was that for me or somebody else?
Well, if you have such experience, you can go ahead.
I'm happy for somebody else to go first, whilst I collect my thoughts.
Sure. I mean, Archana?
I'll just say that I don't have the perspective on both sides, but let me present maybe a little bit on the private sector, and maybe Lloydette would be better off presenting the public sector side. I think there is some truth to that, but we've got to be very careful in saying that it's not a blanket statement. You have organizations that do have a culture, they work very hard, they've probably gone through a lot of issues, which is an impetus for them to change. It is an incentive for them, and in some cases, they don't have a choice but to do that. The private sector gets benchmarked on a lot of parameters and a lot of topics, and diversity and inclusion is one of them. And therefore, there is a lot more of an impetus for them to be doing things. So I'd be careful in saying that, a blanket statement of saying that, the private sector does it more genuinely and they do it more. That's my perspective. And therefore, it's very important that we have these conversations and understand what it really means to genuinely and have a culture where diversity, equality, and inclusion is effective, because we don't want it to be a check in the box like we were talking about earlier on. And that is something that companies sometimes can have issues with. That's at least my perspective from the private sector side.
So just to follow on from you, Archana, I think you're absolutely right. And I've just seen the person who asked the questions clarifying some of that. The reality is that sometimes in the public sector, there is more resistance to change, just because people tend to stay in the jobs within the public sector for much longer, sometimes, especially now, than probably ever before. Somebody would work a public sector job their entire careers and never move government departments, or maybe move once in 30 years. So I think the environment is sometimes not conducive for change to happen as quickly as sometimes it does in the private sector. I think the point that you make around benchmarking and around holding private companies to account is a really important one, because we have seen the SEC, for example, and others, and Financial Conduct Authority in the UK talk precisely around these issues, around board diversity, around, a whole range of benchmarks around equality and diversity going forwards. Those same benchmarks don't apply to civil servants and government departments, apart from the fact that they are internal mechanisms. So I think that can be sometimes why the change seems like it's slow to happen. But at the end of the day, what matters is that the change does happen, even if it's slower. It's just the way it is. But also, I think it depends on the jurisdiction. There are some jurisdictions where the civil service is archaic and has not changed and is never going to change and unwilling to change. And there are others where it is much more fluid, it's much more dynamic, and we are seeing change at a much more rapid pace. And in some cases, actually, the civil service does lead on change rather than being the ones that catch up. It depends on the jurisdiction. So, the person who asked this question, it may be very much the reality in their jurisdiction that's what the civil service is like.
I second your opinion, Lloydette. And if I simply may add to it, I have personally worked with both the private and the public sectors. So, and then in particularly difficult jurisdictions, as you know, the Middle East is not the easiest of regions when it comes to corruption. What I will say as a final add to that question is simply, you have some organizations which have a stronger appetite to have international exposure. So where you may make a difference as a compliance professional is simply position your compliance program as a commercial advantage for the company. So, you know, if you obviously can demonstrate that you have an anti-corruption program to international partners, to lending institutions such as the World Bank, such as, you know, other lending institutions, etc. You know, it's a good plus for your organization to have. So, you know, it could certainly be a good point to obtain the tone at the top and more support for your program. Obviously, that will not be the case for everyone. It's a whole educational process. You know, it's going to take time and obviously awareness for companies in certain regions to understand the benefit of having an anti-corruption program or an anti-corruption management system in place. So, but like I said, this has been my personal experience with it. This is a selling point. At the end of the day, companies are not charities. You know, they're trying to make money. Try to sell it as such. That would be my advice. So we'll take another question from a gentleman this time, from Khalid Masoud, who's saying that we lack the political will as well as facing resistance in system to change or adopt new ideas, particularly convincing for anti-corruption system, which is not easily accepted here. I'm not sure which country he's referring to. How may we make way for implementing compliance requirements or quality standard and SDG 16? And I think I've just touched a bit on that, you know, and how to sell your compliance, your anti-corruption system in certain jurisdictions. But if one of the ladies perhaps has experience in a more problematic jurisdiction, we shall say, you may elaborate on that. Perhaps Myra or Archana? Louis, that's not so much.
Look, I'll start, and then Myra, maybe you can add, supplement. It's again, it's never an easy sell to sell compliance. Let's just say that we have to start from a position of understanding that business has a very different target and goal, and compliance and legal professionals have a very different target and goal. I think the challenge is finding that middle ground, and that's where that selling point that Sophia was talking about comes into play. How do you understand what the business needs and requires, and translate? Sometimes compliance can be also quite complicated, right? A lot of us come from legal backgrounds, and lawyers are not known to make things very simple. Let's just say that. Sometimes it's very difficult. The messaging can be not so easy for people who just want to get things done. And so finding that sweet spot is always going to be the tough one. The easiest way is to find yourself working in organizations that have a great compliance culture. Not all of us always will find ourselves in those positions. And so the other thing that we've kind of thematically touched upon here is networking. I think as a compliance professional, you have to network within the business in the organization. You've got to get their buy-in. You've got to spend a lot of time typically showing them that you are a strategic partner of theirs, and that what you're doing, the compliance work that you're doing, is really something that's to their advantage. I typically find myself, when you're in a new job, you spend the first year only trying to network, get people to know you. And eventually, when you know somebody invites you for lunch or a cup of coffee, you're starting to break that ice. So this is going to be an issue. And I think it is one that you just have to be patient with and understand the business really well, understand what they need, and then find the solutions that can work. And that's kind of how I would approach it. Understand also the jurisdictions that you're working in, understand the business sector you're working in. They all have nuances, such that you're going to have to tailor your thought process. You're going to have to sometimes step down, sometimes you're going to have to step it up. Sometimes you're in sectors that are highly regulated, so that's an easy one. Sometimes you're in tech companies, they're disrupting everything. They have no no rules per se, nothing still regulated. Those are the kind of things that you're going to have to think about. And of course, just do a lot of reading, connect with people in similar industries who've been there for a longer time than you and have some experience, like, Lloydette and Sophia, and where, they give you these practical tips on how you can effectively then break those barriers and set up an effective program. And don't be ambitious. You're going to take a long time to make that happen. So don't be disheartened when it doesn't happen right away.
I will just quickly complement that because I totally agree with everything. But usually we say that people either love or hate, or either you learn because you love it, you have the passion, or either because you have a fine, or because you suffered from that. So in compliance, when we implement, we show both sides. We show the hard side of it, the enforcements, the rules, the laws, and everything that you need to follow up. But also as we are talking here at these topics, not only about regulation, right? It's doing the right thing because it's correct, it's the right thing to do, and just because of it, and showing value. So having this connection with the business is also important, showing the value add to that, but relating to the value, to the message that the company wants to show, especially nowadays that we are talking social media, right? So having their image connect to that, reputation connect to that. But that's not a hard thing to do. It's not not easy thing to do. Is it hard? And we often discuss that a lot. How do you convince people? And just to discuss about it's already hard. Convincing someone is not easy to do. It's not some easy mission in anything, especially in compliance. But also, just last point, when we think of compliance, we think this huge, expensive compliance program, and it's not all about that. So you really need to get into business and see exactly what are the risks. So go to the risk point, what do you need to touch? And then step by step, you start implementing one more robust. But go step by step, see what's the real important to start, and then you with the time you develop a better or more robust, because people are a bit afraid of money, right? Spending too much on it. So
thank you, Myra. Absolutely. I think those are all very good suggestions, and certainly hope that they answer the question. I mean, it's a very long discussion by itself, so unfortunately we won't be able to cover it, and without going too much on a tangent here. But to take another question, we have a question from Shelley Nichols. Who's asking if any of you ladies who have been in compliance or monitoring, investigating, prosecuting financial crime, how have you balanced security and safety considerations for you and your family on the one hand, and your job practices, consultancies on the other? Who's raising their hand for that one? I see a lot of Lloydette. Go ahead, Lloydette.
I'll take that, Sophia, first, and there may be some others who want to add something. The reality of my former roles in government is that we were investigating the most complex and high-profile financial crime cases in the world, in some cases. And we have been subject to people being followed, to potentially, people fearing for their own safety. And now that I'm in the private, and obviously you trust your government department to be able to take care of you or protect you. But really the responsibility when I was a government lawyer solely rested with me in terms of putting in place things that would enable me to protect myself. So for example, you weren't really allowed to have a social media profile. That was a significant thing. Or if you did, you would find that you were advised not to put your full name, etc., and not to share your details, as we liberally do these days, on our movements, etc., etc. So there were just some basic common sense things that we were told not to do. And there was a whole document on social media and the importance of following those guidelines within there. Now that I'm in the private sector, it is slightly different, but I'm still mindful of those potential security considerations. So if you looked at my social media page, you would not be able to see any pictures of my children. I think I've got one of my son around the beginning of Black Lives Matter, where it's not even of him, it's just you can barely see him. But I don't really share pictures of my children. I am very mindful in terms of my details. I don't generally share information about where I am or what I'm doing at any period of time. I will normally not even post that I'm at an event if I'm in a physical event until after the event has passed. And then I go on social media and say, I was at this event in Paris last night. It was great. I'm back home. So it's just really being mindful of these things and really taking a very common sense approach, but also be mindful of oversharing. Because we see this not just for those of us who work in investigating and prosecuting financial crime, but for the average Joe on the street. You know, these wives of footballers who tweet their whole lives or who put their whole lives on Instagram, and they go on holiday, we're leaving now, we're in the car. And so yes, the burglar comes and steals your £1 million worth of jewelry. There are things that we just have to be mindful of in terms of sharing our location when we're in those locations, and really being very careful about the information that we put out into the ethosphere, the internet, because once it's out there, it can't be retrieved, and people will use that information in whatever way they choose to. So there is very little that I post or tweet where I don't have that consideration at the back of my mind about how this information could be used. Obviously, no method is foolproof. We all have phones. These are tracking devices. They follow us everywhere. But I am always conscious of those security and safety issues.
I'll just add one point, since we're talking about women and the challenges they face, and we're talking about investigations. I think one thing that might happen for some women, I certainly know I face this personally, is when you're a woman and you're investigating, there is this need to be strong and to be fearless. And so it is important for you to really assess how difficult a situation you're in, and whether the security and the support you're getting from your organization, and here I talk about the private sector, is something that you're comfortable with. And I think it should not be something that you feel fearful of or ashamed of to say, I'm not comfortable, getting on that flight to that country to hold these, contentious interviews with employees who I know are mightily disgruntled. That is something that I'd really put out there. There is no sense in trying to do your job like your male counterpart would, right? Because you don't hear them say that I don't want to get on a flight. And though that doesn't, that's happened to me. I've had a male counterpart who said, I'm not flying there, and I did. But again, it came from a place of, I was leading the matter. I was in charge of the overall investigation, and therefore I felt this immense pressure of, even though I felt scared, I didn't necessarily feel that I was being given the kind of support that would make me feel comfortable. I did it because I just didn't want to be the woman who sits there and says, I'm too scared to get on a flight. So that's just something I'd say very practically, be very conscious of what's right, because you need to be alive to do the job that you do and to make the difference that you make.
That is a hugely important point, Sophia. And I just wanted to fully buttress that completely. Part of our role pre-COVID was getting on planes and trains all over the world. And there are just security implications of that. And so, don't push past your instinct on some things. If you don't feel like it's going to be safe, yes, absolutely, don't do it, or find an alternative way. And as we move forward into virtual working and hybrid working, there are alternatives. But I can't echo that more. You don't have to, because you shouldn't have to put yourself in that position just because the guy in the team is fine with it. If you feel that your safety would be compromised, then you should take appropriate action.
Yeah, this is very, very powerful words, Loidette, and certainly new considerations, for most of us that work in compliance and have probably not thought of these safety issues, but certainly good pointers for anyone involved in investigations. And, you know, unfortunately, this is just a reality that in certain countries, you know, people who investigate anti-corruption, not necessarily in a law enforcement capacity, but also in a lawyer or you know, an investigator capacity, may also be exposed to retaliation, whether physical harm or whatnot. So those are, you know, excellent considerations to think about, especially as a woman. So thank you for sharing those, Archana and Loidette. And we'll take one more question before we close this session. I'm conscious of time. So I don't know if this is really a question or perhaps a recommendation that could be done offline, but the question goes as such. Colleagues typing my question here, if you could recommend any research linking the anti-corruption capacity of the enterprise with the inclusivity of the corporate culture. I'm asking, as the people in power to take the decisions on being more inclusive are not always ready to listen and would need substantiated arguments coming perhaps from the academic world. So I'm not from the academic world. I don't know, Mary, maybe have some suggestions, or if not, that's something that could be answered separately, but I'm personally not aware of such research. I'm sure there is, but I'm simply not aware of it. I don't know if any of you is.
Nothing that springs to mind immediately, but I wonder if IACA, who have a good repository of information and experts, may be able to point this individual to some research.
We will definitely have a look at it and get back to you, as this is something quite interesting and important, but I cannot point out anything right now, I'm sorry. But education, of course, is very important, and also we are very happy that Myra and Archana is an alumni, and Myra is a current student and one of our master programs, and research is very important in the anti-corruption world, and key also for women to support and to find a voice in the work field. Definitely a topic to study if it doesn't exist already. So thank you for pointing it out, Nazarchuk. So finally, I think we have come to the end of our discussion. I'll give back the forum to you, Mary, to simply close down the session. And I want to thank our audience for all your comments and for all your questions. Certainly, there's a lot to read and a lot to ponder for us as we go forward. So thank you to everyone. Yes, also thank you from IACA side to all of our great speakers and moderators, Sophia. It was a pleasure listening to all of you. I already had a great time meeting you beforehand in our meeting to prepare this webinar. I think we learned a lot, especially as women, and I think we all know it's quite important to keep the dialogue, and it's just the first webinar of many in this year, and I hope everyone will stay in touch and also log in the upcoming ones. And yes, thank you so much for everyone. And if you need any more information, of course, our website at ayaca.int is available, and to write us an email to studies@ayaca.int, and I'm happy to stay and keep in touch with you. Thank you so much, all of you. It was great having you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
So much, Sophia and Marie.